Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Our program is about to start. Please be seated. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joe Nye, chair of the Aspen Strategy Group, and many, many years ago, Bill Perry and Brent Scowcroft and I started the Aspen Strategy Group. And over the years, we've had a great deal of success, and now we're particularly interested in the forum, which raises the issues we're interested in with a broader audience. As you heard yesterday, this is the 13th Aspen Security Forum, and it is also a forum held in Aspen after a hiatus of 3 years. We did have a very successful abbreviated session in Washington last November, but you know, it's not quite the same as being in Aspen. When we basically thought of coming out to discuss strategy and security in Aspen, we thought, you know, there's something to be said for getting away from Washington, D.C., and there's also a chance that you'll get away from the 60-second soundbite that's so prevalent and have chances to go into questions at greater length. And I think after listening to last night's openers, we've shown you that that's quite possible. So Anja Manuel, our impresario and director, is going to tell you a little bit about the program in the morning. I'm just here to welcome you and to say that what's quite remarkable about the 3 years hiatus that we've had is the huge major events that have occurred. One, of course, was COVID, where we've seen, by the London Economist's estimate, 15 million people die. And the other, of course, is the Ukraine war, where we've seen the outbreak of major military hostilities on the European continent at a time when it was widely believed this was not possible. So we've had two major events in the period since we all met together last in person 3 years ago. I think the important thing to notice is that we could do better. As a former professor, I've sometimes said that if I were grading the human response to these two great events, I would give the response to COVID an F. I think we basically failed in terms of international cooperation and ability to cope with this. With the Ukraine war, I think the grade has to be incomplete. We really don't know how this is turning out. So far, we're off to a reasonable start, but as I said, who knows whether we're even halfway through it, maybe much less. So we are faced with a situation where the kinds of issues that we're going to be discussing, where we're faced with failing grades or incompletes. And that gets me to the theme of this year's Security Forum. How can we do better? What are the things we can change? What is there that we can do for the various speakers as they explore their areas to transform things, to do better than we've done over the past 3 years since we first or last met in Aspen? And I think that's a challenge for all of us, but it also promises to be good reason for us to meet again in the mountains and to have the situation where we can get beyond 60-minute sound bites and start thinking hard about these crucial questions. So with that, let me turn it over to Anja, who's going to tell you a preview of coming attractions, and then we'll get right into our first panel. Anja.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, everyone. It's so good to see you all. I hope everyone got a little bit of a moment this morning to enjoy beautiful Aspen. And we're back, and we're starting our first full day of programming. When I kicked us off last night, I read you some headlines from the United States from the 50s, from the 70s, even from the early 80s, that had America on the back foot, seemingly defeated. But every time we have had a challenge in this country, we've eventually, sometimes it took a little while, but eventually gotten to it, moved together, and come up with solutions, and almost always the best solutions have happened on a bipartisan basis. So that's what we're in the business of doing here today. We're going to talk about the big challenges that face the country, but every single session we have is going to be focused solidly on what are we going to do differently, as Joe just said. What are we going to do creatively? How are we going to innovate our way out of this conundrum? So we have a huge and packed and amazing program for you today. We're going to start it off with a region that's on everyone's mind, the Indo-Pacific. We have a great panel lined up there. Then we move into new technologies. We will hear about cyber and cryptocurrencies and even quantum and what's happening with domestic terrorism. We then will move to having two presentations from the US military, the US Air Force, and the general who leads US Southern Command. We break for lunch, and then back to China, we will hear from the Chinese ambassador, Ambassador Qin, moving right into the future of supply chains, modernization, and the future of warfare, and really two sessions focused on what's the Pentagon going to do differently? What are we going to do? We're spending $800 billion a year. How are we going to spend it more effectively and in a way that actually keeps our country safe? And finally, the kind of capstone for this afternoon's session is you will hear from CIA Director Bill Burns, who of course has been very creative in his use of intelligence leading up to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We then move back across to the Greenwald Pavilion, where we all met last night, for a program that's combined with a public programming that's going to focus squarely on Russia. We are lucky to have with us a gentleman named Vladimir Ashurkov, who runs the Anti-Corruption Foundation, which is Alexei Navalny's foundation, so it's one of the primary dissidents in Russia. And we have two great panels talking about what are the sanctions, what's happening in Russia internally on one hand, and the other hand, what is the US doing, what are the sanctions? So we've got a big program for you today, and without further ado, I'll let Joe kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Anja, and we could get the panel to come up.